Hey guys, Jesse here, and today we're going to learn how to weather for the absolute beginner. This video is brought to you by the Gunpla Collective. Please check out their site in the link below. And today we're going to be weathering this HG Schwab Grays. Now I know this is a painted build, but the techniques I'm about to show you also apply to unpainted builds. So what I'm about to show you can be done directly onto plastic and you will get the same results. We're going to be covering two techniques today. We're going to be learning how to do some chipping with a sponge and dry brushing. Now, before I start, I just want to say I have two far more in-depth tutorials on my channel. There's one dedicated purely for sponging and one purely for dry brushing and battle damage and so forth. So please check those two out if you want to get more info. But this should sort of encompass both results or both techniques and get you a result that I think many beginners will be pleased with. So let's start out with what you need. So first off, you'll need a sponge. It can be any sponge really, just make sure it's somewhat dense, kind of like this. This is actually cut off from a larger, rounder sponge here. You can find variety packs of sponges from hobby stores or like Hobby Lobby or Michael's. But you can also use just like home sponges from Walmart or wherever, as long as it's, like I said, somewhat dense like this. For your dry brushing, you're going to need a brush, obviously. Here I've got this weathering brush from GSI Krios. I just bought these just because I was interested in them, but to be honest, you don't need to buy a specific quote-unquote weathering brush. All you need is something that's shaped somewhat like this, and you just need to cut the bristles so that they're short like this. I've used this one for years and years and years, and it has served me just fine. Like I said, I just wanted to check these out. But you want to make sure that the bristles on the end are somewhat hard, and if you can't find any hard bristles and you can only find soft ones, over time when you get some paint on it and it kind of dries up, it'll make the bristles hard. Honestly, don't spend a lot of money on a quote-unquote weathering brush or a brush you're going to use for weathering, because it's going to get trashed no matter what you do. So I have another example here for one I used for a long time. See, as you can see, it's pretty messed up. Like, this brush would only be good for weathering at this point. At this point, I would probably cut the bristles here and make this shorter. But that's the kind of brush you're looking for, something this sort of shape that you can just cut down the bristles very short. And then finally, of course, you're going to need some paint. I'm going to be using this Tester's enamel. I think it's flat aluminum. Let's see if I can find flat aluminum for my silver dry brushing. And for my sponging, I'm going to be using black. And I'm just going to be using this cheap old acrylic black folk art from Walmart. Then finally, after you're all done putting all your weathering onto the kit, you're going to top coat it. And this is mandatory, because this, for one, gives it a final finish that is more akin to weathered kits, and it will protect the paint that you just put onto the kit. I'm going to be using this TS80 Tamiya, just simply because this is my favorite, but use any sort of matte coat that you like. I highly suggest using matte, because a gloss-coated weather kit just doesn't look right. You can try it if you want, but I've tried it in the past and it looks very, very strange. So matte coat is what I suggest. Now before I begin, I just want to talk about the sort of colors you want to work with when weathering. So most of the time we'll be doing silver dry brushing, and you'll see this on many, many, many kits. Of course, you can dry brush with any color you want. Technically, the technique applies to all colors of paint. I guess that's pretty obvious, but we like to use silver because most metal, whenever you scratch off the paint and get to the bare metal, it's going to be metallic. So that's just kind of what we like to work with. Silver works best on colors like red, black, gray, blue, green, a lot of the darker colors. You do not want to dry brush silver onto white, simply because it doesn't look good. Maybe in the real world, when you scratch off white paint on something that's at the surface silver, it'll look like that, but it just doesn't look good. So we want to avoid using silver on colors like yellow, white, very light orange can also look kind of strange with silver dry brushing. So yeah, we won't be using silver for that. And on the flip side, when it comes to black, you want to use black sponging or even black dry brushing on very, very light colors like white and yellow and such. So just keep that in mind as you're weathering your kit. Make sure that you're using the appropriate color on the appropriate color. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with sponging first, just because the idea here for this little weathering job we're going to do on this guy is we're going to weather some parts to look like that only paint came off when we're just seeing the primer, well, quote unquote the primer. And then we're going to weather some parts that look like it got past the primer and we're on to like the bare metal. And the entire time you're weathering, you want to keep two things in mind: subtlety and story. And what I mean by that is you really, really, really want to be subtle with your weathering. I know a lot of people like to go really crazy when they dry brush, and then suddenly it's on the surface of their of large pieces, and then it just, you can see all the brush strokes and so forth. So you really want to avoid overdoing things. If you feel like you're overdoing something, just stop, take a break, take a look at it from afar, and fix any mistakes you may have made. Don't keep going and trying to make everything look overdone. Unless you're trying to make like a super trash build, and trash as in it, the mobile suit looks trashed. And when I talk about story, I'm talking about keep in mind what you're trying to say with your mobile suit. For this guy, we're just going to make him look slightly used. Maybe he's back from his second test flight, third test flight, who knows. But he's not going to be in battle, so we're not going to have any battle scars or anything like that. So you want to really keep in mind what you're trying to get across with your weathering. If you're trying to get across some crazy used war machine that's been on the field for like 10 years and never been maintained, then be sure to weather it in such a way. If your idea is the same as mine and you end up with that 10-year trashed machine, then something went wrong. Is about the best thing I can say. So yeah, subtlety and story. So let's keep those in mind as we start. So we're going to put this down real quick, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shake my bottle of black paint here. I'm going to open it up, and we'll have to use the cap here because the top of that's a little too tall. You'll need a paper towel. I forgot to mention this. My apologies, but you'll need a paper towel here. You're going to take your sponge, and you're going to lightly touch it onto the black paint. Just like that. And you're just going to sponge it onto this paper towel until you get most of it off, and you get a pattern that you like. That's pretty good. And so on this model, we're going to work on the chest mainly. We're just going to lightly, and I mean lightly, touch the edges of the model. And you really want to focus on the corners, and again, just the edges. We'll cover a little bit on how to tackle larger surfaces when we get to the head. But as you can see, that's already looking really, really nice. You don't want to go too all out. Again, we're thinking about subtlety here. Just want to lightly touch. Just like that. And if you mess up, because this paint should still be a little bit wet, you can go ahead and wipe it off with some thinner, or just a paper towel, probably without thinner might even do. That's looking pretty good. Like that would do it for me on the chest here. Just very, very lightly chipped. We'll go ahead and put a chip right onto the surface, and you just have to lightly touch it onto the surface. Let's see if I can get that in focus. Just like that. You can see the little black spots right there. Just FYI, I've got it on a stick here just for my convenience, but usually I'll just hold the model in my hand. But just for filming convenience, I've got it the way I do now. Also, you may be noticing that I'm weathering just the head and the torso here. I like to do things by units, so I'll be doing the head and the torso, and then I'll just do the arms and the legs and then the waist, etc., until it's done. So some people like to weather the entire thing once it's built. Some people like to do piece by piece. It's whatever's up to you. The reason I like to do things unit by unit as they're assembled is because I like to imagine that this thing is getting weathered, as it's already assembled and fighting and stuff. So I'm going to weather it in a way that is realistic. So it kind of sets up how it would really be in the real world. So if some armor gets in the way and I can't reach it, then that would be an indication that in the real world, weathering might not be able to reach it either. Hope that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish this off camera, but I think that demonstrates the technique there pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this guy up, and we will move on to dry brushing. Alright, so now I finished sponging everything on here. As you can see, just the edges have really been done on here on the head. I did some sponging right on the larger surface. My camera will focus, there we go. So you can see all you have to do for that is just, again, just lightly touch the surface, the large surface of the piece, and you should get something like that. But yeah, so everything's been sponged at this point. And personally, I like to reuse my sponges, so I just cleaned off my sponge with some water. It's water-based acrylic paint, so I can do that. It's up to you if you'd like to just throw away that piece of sponge and use a new one, or try to reuse your old one. So again, completely up to you. So let's go ahead and move on to our dry brushing. So we're going to take this bottle of silver, and I'm going to go ahead and shake it up here. And the idea behind dry brushing is exactly that. We're going to brush on dry paint. And speaking of drying, I let this dry for maybe 60 seconds because you're putting so little paint on this model, and it's acrylic for one. It's going to dry almost immediately. If you want to be paranoid about it, you could probably give it about 5 minutes before you move on to the next technique. But in any case, dry brushing. So we're really going to paint this piece of paper more than we're actually going to paint the model with dry brushing. So getting this bottle open right now. And I'm going to take my brush here, get paint on it. Ooh, I'm almost out of this. I have to go to the bottom of the bottle for that. And all we're going to do is paint this piece of paper until we get a pattern that is best described as chalky. As you can see, just like this. We're about ready to dry brush now. And I like to turn the brush around because the last thing you want is to have one side of this brush ready for dry brushing and the other one still wet. You will end up touching a piece of the model you didn't want to touch and get paint all over it. So we're ready. So all we're going to do is just lightly whack the edges with the brush. And all this is going to do is highlight those edges. You never want to go down large surfaces, large flat surfaces with this technique. This is meant for edges and scratches. As you can see, we're getting a nice silver highlight to all these edges. As you can also see, I'm also going over a lot of the black already on there. Focus, there we go. And this just gives a very nice, subtle, used look. And you can go over it a little bit more if you want a little bit more depth to it, a little more silver on it. And don't be afraid to go back and put some more paint on this and do the same painting on the tissue or paper if you feel like you need a little bit more paint. But this is such a fun and easy technique, guys. Like, one of the #1 questions I get, is some of you might be able to imagine, is how do you weather your kits? And it's not some secret super pro method or anything, because I'm not a super secret pro. It's just this very easy technique that I've been doing for years now, and has been like, I don't know, the cavemen probably knew how to dry brush at one point. That's how old this modeling technique is. As you can see, just highlighting. Nothing crazy. And another thing to keep in mind, I guess this should have been a third thing, the secret third rule, is to be consistent. Don't have some area that's crazy weathered and one side that is devoid of weathering. Just try to be consistent with your weathering. I'm while doing these two skirts just now, I was constantly checking one side versus the other to make sure they look like they fit on the same mobile suit. Unless your story calls for some sort of crazy weathering to one side of the model. And where it really looks great is on the inner frame, because this gray really benefits from some scratches and such. As you can see, it's getting a little sloppy there, but that's okay. It's the inner frame. You can get a little sloppy with the inner frame. Yep, just get all the nooks and crannies. Again, you're just whacking it up against the edges. I'm almost out of paint on my brush here, but that's it. That's the technique of dry brushing. Very, very simple. Again, you want to be very, very subtle with it. Don't really go anything beyond the edges, as you can see. And I'll show this all done before I top coat it, but you'll want to top coat everything in the end, which I'll also show. But in any case, I'm going to finish up dry brushing this guy, and we'll see what that looks like. Alright, so now I'm back after dry brushing everything on this guy. I did the inner frame and the head and everything. And some of you might be saying to yourself, well, Jesse, it really doesn't look like you did much to this model at all. And my response to that would be, well, yeah, that's the point. Weathering should truly be very subtle. You want to get the response of, wow, that looks real, not, wow, that looks painted, if that makes sense. You really want it to look like it's been naturally weathered. And I think when you scale it back down to this subtle level of just highlighting the edges, maybe hitting up a few, large surfaces like that on the head with some chipping, you'll really get this nice sense of realism from your build. Something I forgot to mention while dry brushing was that if you do end up making a mistake, like I mentioned, where you get a lot of paint on the model for whatever reason, all you got to do is take another brush with some thinner on it and just wipe it up, or take a tissue with some thinner and just wipe it off and start over. If you make a mistake, fix it right away, especially with paint. So that's all I got to say on that little note. But I know right now it doesn't look that realistic because it was gloss coated before I did this weathering. It's just part of the painting process. You have to gloss coat after you've painted everything, do all your techniques, and then finally matte coat it. That's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to go take this thing outside, matte coat it, and I'll be back with the truly finished product. Alright, so I'm back from spraying a top coat of Tamiya TS80, a nice matte top coat. And as you can see, it looks much, 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 much better. Far more realistic, far more like painted metal. And yeah, this is why you should always matte coat your weathered builds. And as you can see, we achieved this look very, very easily. It's just a bit of dry brushing, sponging, and a top coat. So if you liked what you see here, then hopefully my tutorial helped you guys out. Again, this is a very easy thing to do. I believe anyone can do this who's interested in weathering. All you need is to grab some of the supplies and just get to it and do it. So again, hopefully this helped. And that's it for this tutorial. So thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye.